The data management plan headings in the MRC revised guidance are as follows. And I should emphasize we've got to be rather careful that we don't ask you to repeat the information that's already in the what we call case for support, which is the main grant application, because that's of no value to anybody. But just to describe what kind of data your study involves: surveys, clinical measurements, interviews, medical records, and the scale. Are we talking about hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of records? Sometimes you are not clear. Under collection, usually the methodology for collection and data verification, double entry and so on, are already clear in the case for support, but if they're not, you can very briefly describe them here. And if you're using formal standards, name the standard. Management documentation and curation could be a very long piece in some of your data management plans. So if you are following particular standards, recognized international standards, that's all you really need to say. You don't need to go into long descriptions, and you particularly don't need to reproduce the length of your institutional policies. If you're using metadata standards such as the DDI2 or the DDI3, just tell us that that's what you're doing. We actually really want to know that you understand what metadata mean and that you're not just digging your own metadata hole in the ground over there. We don't need to know all the details. Security and confidentiality, I think, will be something that this audience thinks a lot about because you're dealing very often with personal data. Again, you might be using the ISO 27001, and therefore you won't need to describe the locks on your filing cabinets and how many buttons people have got to press on the door to get in through the door. You can just say that you are either following those or your data standards are essentially fundamentally consistent with that set of standards. If there is something peculiar about the nature of your data, you may want to give us some additional reassurance. Sharing and access. The key thing that I would point to here is MRC's policy for population and health sciences, that A, your data must be discoverable. Somebody must know that you've got a study and the kind of variables it's got. B, that your policy on access is discoverable. In other words, you've got one and we can find out what it is. And if you're managing something that could be reasonably considered a resource for others, that there is some independence in the way access is reviewed. There's not one size fits all for that. Certain studies will be in very high demand or may have very sensitive issues around access and require a fairly elaborate and frequent structures. Others, it can be very much more simple, that maybe once a year you tell somebody else who's independent of you, a named expert, you tell them what you've done, and they've got the ability to challenge you on actually if you've turned any requests down. It's mainly your success in supporting others and why you've turned requests down that might be of interest to us. Give yourself a pat on the back if you wrote this for your principal investigator. So if you're the responsible person for the data management policies in your study, make sure you're named. Not least because other people may want to get in touch with you and learn about the quality of your work. And then if you have done work in the past and this is a renewal of your application, crow about the number of requests that you have filled